DevOps term is kind of in a weird spot right now because for a long time it was really undefined what it is. I would say that industry is actually moving away from it. So there is more specialization than it used to be before. This is a role that is so undefined that it makes you into a jack of all trades. And I'm not sure how it fits into the world that values specialization. If there is a problem that nobody wants to do, it's a DevOps problem. And it can be absolutely outside of your expertise, right? DevOps is kind of the embodiment of how to deal with technical debt, right? It is something that is not very visible. It doesn't always bring business value. Having good processes surrounding the automation, both for the infrastructure, for the security, and so on, is something that is worth investing into early, at least in a way.
And welcome to episode 4, Agents of Change podcast, sponsored by AppStream Studio. Today's guest, we have Bartek Bieńkowski. Welcome, Bartek.
Hello. Nice to meet you. Well, we do know each other, right, for the past 3 years, so I guess the novelty has already worn off. But
that's right.
Those are new circumstances for sure.
So a little bit about Bartek. Bartek leads all DevOps and security here at AppStream, and we're super excited to chat with him today about all things DevOps, the foundation of any great software or AI system is the infrastructure in which it is built upon. And Bartek's going to share all his 15 years of wisdom in DevOps and how the role is changing in the AI age. Let's jump right in. Bart, what does a terrible day of DevOps look like and feel like?
Okay, so terrible day usually starts before you actually normally wake up. So if someone is calling you before you manage to actually sleep till your phone is, your alarm is set, that would indicate the day is going to be pretty fucked up. So, and in our case, usually it is Łukasz who would interrupt my slumber and ask some questions that, of course, I don't have the capacity to answer when I'm in a fog surrounding the sleep. Basically, this is one thing that is kind of characteristic to the DevOps work, especially if you are limited to 1 or 2 people in a team, that you pretty much are always in work. As in, you can always expect someone calling, something needed to be done. So, probably the worst day is the ones when you actually get interrupted because it always indicates that something unexpected happened. And this is another characteristic of a DevOps work. You are the go-to person if anything stops working, right? So even if the application is to blame, you are the first one to actually be contacted, and then you do the debugging for something that can be absolutely unrelated to your work. So I hope I answered your questions broadly enough.
No, extremely well said. DevOps are the unsung heroes of any development team. I actually don't think that DevOps as a profession, or sometimes referred to as like site reliability engineer or DevOps or infrastructure, I don't think they get enough credit in the software engineering space.
I mean, it's hard to say, right? Because, well, first of all, I would say that DevOps term is kind of in a weird spot right now because for a long time it was really undefined what it is. And I would say that industry is actually moving away from it. So there is more specialization than it used to be before. And actually, the site reliability engineer is a term that becomes more popular, I think. And this also comes down to 2 things. So unlike, for example, programmers or, your usual teams, the client of a DevOps usually isn't the client of a company. It's the development team itself, right? Because those are the guys that actually define what needs to be done, how to help them, and it is their life that you usually try to make simpler. But this is also something that is changing a little bit because the skill set of a programmer now usually involves some kind of knowledge about Kubernetes pipelines and so on and so on. So I would say that even 5 years ago, it was usually this way around, that you were also responsible for all the automations for the quality of life of the developers, and you were much more hidden from the client. Nowadays, I would say that DevOps is leaning more into cloud, into infrastructure, into site reliability, and so on. So I wouldn't say that it's as invisible to the client, especially if something actually is on fire, because then it is supremely visible to the client. So, yeah, but I would say that the observation that you've made is correct in general, that as long as everything is fine, you are pretty much invisible, which is a trade-off, right?
So it's fascinating. It's awesome to see how the role has evolved and changed, right, in just the last 5 years, and the prior 20, even before that, especially through the emergence of cloud and serverless, and just basically using other people's computers versus your own, right? How did you wind up in DevOps? What's your origin story? Give us your background and how you got here.
Okay, so before working in BankUp, which was kind of the origin story for Łukasz, me, and Piotr, I was a front-end developer, which given that I was absolutely uneducated towards doing front-end development, it was interesting, but also I wasn't particularly good at it. Because it was pretty much my first experience with IT and so on. And I was quite convinced that I do want to go towards programming/IT. So then I actually got recruited into BankUp as a front developer, because that was the only thing that I knew. However, this was done before without Łukasz's knowledge, who was the tech lead /CTO there. So I came to work. He came to work, and we were both shocked that, we have seen each other. I was shocked because I wanted to do my job, and he was shocked because he needed a tester / somebody different altogether. So they tried to push me into the tester role, and I was terrible at testing because I find it extremely boring. So we together came into conclusion that I'll be moved towards support. However, I was terrible at support because I found it extremely boring. So I was pushed more towards DevOps and in general, maintaining the cloud infrastructure for BankUp, because this was something that pretty much everyone lacked expertise in and nobody found interesting. But in my case, I did find it interesting because I did have a perspective of testing and support behind me. So, I pretty much ended up being responsible probably for much more than I should be. But given that anyone else wasn't aware what the good practices are and so on, I was pretty much left to be self teach myself. I am absolutely unsure if this is a proper English phrase, but you get my point.
I do.
Yep.
Is there any early mistakes that you made that completely changed or reframed how you think about the role?
I mean, hindsight is always 20/20, right? So of course I can say I would do things differently, but given the knowledge that I had back then, I don't think I was irrational in the way that I approach things. I would probably, I don't think I have a good answer to this one. I mean, I would like to know much more, and I think that I could have gotten much more knowledge concerning the cloud from the start. I could have pursued some basic courses that are angled more towards supporting the development teams and so on and so on. But given my lack of direction, and also it was really hard for everyone to actually point me to the right direction, because, as I said, I was pretty much alone in with the topic, and this was also before LLMs were a thing.
And really, honest, infrastructure as code too, yeah?
Infrastructure as a code actually was there to some extent, because Azure, I think almost from the start, had ARM templates and so on. And this was actually my first approach. Terraform was worse, and wasn't as popular as it is now. But the general principle of treating infrastructure as a code was already there. However, it took me some time to actually discover it, right? Because this is something that LLM saves an enormous amount of time right now. It's the case when I have a new topic that I'm completely ignorant in, and they at least give you some pointers that save you huge amounts of time when it comes to trying to discover the basics, giving you direction, and so on. But it was lacking then, so yeah, I think it could be done faster. So if I could change a thing, because it's not necessarily about my action, I would like to have a mentor, someone who actually knew what he's talking about when it comes to infrastructure, good practices, and so on and so on.
And who was that mentor for you?
Actually, no one. That's my point. As much as I like working with Łukasz, and I've met a lot of really intelligent and capable people, I first time had a contact with someone who I could treat as a mentor in this niche was when I was working for Rolls-Royce and for Objectivity and then Accenture, because they had a very initially. They had a very strong mentorship program. But it was also a little bit different because in order to get a job, I already needed to have some knowledge, right? But I think that this is something that is extremely important when you're going into tech, is to have someone that is actually going to guide you. At least this is my observation. Maybe it is a little bit skewed because it feels like something that I was lacking in the case of those technical problems. Because when it comes to the general introduction to the tech environment, I was very lucky both in my front-end development job and then when I met Łukasz and other guys, because I was given a lot of chances, right? Because this is kind of both a good and a bad thing that given the small scale of the company that recruited me, I was given responsibilities that weren't exactly matching my skills. So they were willing to give me more responsibility and to give me some lenience, which made the growth possible. But on the trade-off was that I didn't have a mentor, right? Or someone who actually knew how the end effect is supposed to look like. So, I was lucky for sure, because I do not have the education for IT.
So from Bank App to Rolls-Royce, Objectivity, Accenture, to now here, is there a hot take or a belief or that you have about DevOps?
Hot take about DevOps. I'm not sure if it's a hot take, but I think that this is a role that is so undefined that it makes you into a jack of all trades. And I'm not sure how it fits into the world that values specialization. So if there is a problem that nobody wants to do, it's a DevOps problem. And it can be absolutely outside of your expertise, right? So you become an IT department for IT people, which I'm not exactly sure if it's a hot take, right? And this is also something that I would say the industry is kind of drifting away from a little bit. But DevOps is so undefined that I would say that it needs to die as a term. So yeah, if you want something controversial or maybe not, that would be it.
All right, you heard it here first. DevOps needs to die.
I think I'm not the first one to say it.
So
I believe that there are articles online.
Let's lean into that. Where, if DevOps is to die, like where does this specialization, where does this niche, where does this role look like in 3, 5, 10 years?
To be honest, I have no idea. But DevOps was a term that was very sexy and everyone was talking about it probably back in 2010s and maybe before, I don't know. And there is always this effect of overhyping things, right? So we are finding the panaceum, the holy grail of everything, and we try to solve every single problem by leaning into it. And AI is kind of the same, right? Because this is the next decade, the next new sexy thing. I believe for a moment Bitcoin is based on what's the term? Not the chain.
Zero trust?
Blocks.
Blockchain?
No.
Zero trust?
Blockchain. Thank you very much. This is the word that I forgot. And for a moment, it was also the solution to all things considered, right? And there is also this fashions that come when it comes to programming patterns, and they become anti-patterns, and so on and so on. So I have no idea where it's going to end up, but my guess would be the roles will be much more specialized. Because, however, I'm not sure if everything that currently the DevOps does is going to be needed, right? Because, for example, if you take a look at, I don't know, Kubernetes and microservices, there's always this question about finding the right tools for the job. And I believe that both programmers, probably most technical people, are drawn into complexity. And all those tools that solve problems at scale are introduced sometimes to the teams that don't necessarily need those. And DevOps is kind of a supporting role for the development teams, right? Because you are kind of like a multiplier to the efficiency of a given team. So if the team is small enough, it doesn't really make sense to automate the things that become true problems at scale. So I have no idea. However, I do think that IT as a whole is going to change in a way because we have introduced such a big variable in form of AI, LLMs, and so on, that the volatility of the whole system has changed so much that the predictions become unreliable.
That's an interesting point, and I think we're seeing that a lot as a company. Governance, framework, security, risks, even hallucinations, presenting the wrong information, or presenting, to a model provider or to AI solution proprietary data, right? So maybe looking through the DevOps through the lens of AI and then somewhat of the future. You briefly touched on it, but maybe shake the magic 8-ball a little harder here. What do you think the new DevOps problems in the AI age will be? Like, what are you seeing in your day-to-day work now as we do tons of work implementing, advising, and building generative AI products on behalf of our customers? Like, what are you seeing now as the problems that these LLMs or horizontal model providers and the like are creating?
So when it comes to the infrastructure or to the security, it's always a little bit behind. It's like a space industry. You don't always want to have the newest, sexiest solution. You want something that is proven and tested and so on. So often I would say that those fields lean towards reliance at the cost of it being, bleeding edge, right? Because the costs of a mistake are different. It's not like displaying wrong piece of data to a client or application crashing. If you look at data, or personal data or health protected information, anything like this, you're pretty much screwed on a company level, right? So I think that LLMs are going to, well, first facilitate the scaling of the smaller company. So there is, of course, this argument that the small companies can punch above its weight a little bit, right? Because you get access to automations that previously would require teams of people to handle, which is great. But then again, we are trying to implement it in a field that is that has heavy consequences if you mess up. And I don't. And normally, if you have a team of people, the responsibility is a little bit unclear. You're a little bit protected, but I don't think the defense, if something is done badly, in form of okay, this is what LLM told us is going to work. So I think that the risks of implementing implementing LLMs and into security and into infrastructure are going to be, the whole process is going to look a little bit differently than it is for the programming, right? So I would guess that the small company will try to do it faster and risking more. And the bigger companies are going to do it in a much more contained, modularized way. And I think that the standards for the testability of the solution provided by LLM in those fields of security infrastructure are going to be a little bit higher. So interesting time, but my guess is that both fields are going to be a step behind programming.
Is there you support several development teams, here at AppStream. Is there any frameworks? Is there anything? Maybe frameworks isn't the right word, but is there any thing that you keep seeing on our own teams internally where maybe engineers are overconfident right now in their use of LLMs or use of certain infrastructure services?
So, okay, maybe let's start with LLM first because it is a little bit different. I would say that it is very different for the experienced programmers and the beginning programmers because the experienced ones know how to use it. They know where the LLM has issues, right? They can actually see the code generated or the modules, the project structure, and they, because of the experience, they will see something that needs a little bit of tweaking, and they have much more ease when it comes to fixing those errors, right? I think for the junior developers or less experienced people, the tool offers more solutions, right? Because you don't know how the proper code should work. You trust the LLM, right? Because it generates the code on the higher quality than you can yourself. Therefore, you cannot really challenge it. And this leads into this problematic, let's say, imbalance that the senior developers become much more efficient. The junior developers also become much more efficient, but they're learning at a much slower pace. For me in particular, I'm in this weird spot because I'm much more experienced when it comes to the infrastructure part, automation part, and so on. I'm not very experienced when it comes to programming that I'm trying to learn. And I can see difference in myself, how I interact with the things generated based on my level of understanding of certain concepts. So when it comes to infrastructure, I have some framework for Azure, some patterns that I use, that I trust, and so on and so on. And when this allows me to be much more exact when generating the prompts to do something, right? Because I know what the edge cases that I want to pay attention to are, and I can be much more precise, let's say, when working with LLM. And then if I'm working on a task that is purely programming related, I am not as experienced, and there is also a pressure of time. It's very tempting to just put it to Claude, ask him to do it, and then it generates something that I don't fully understand.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think ever before there was, maybe frameworks, right, that they were also treated a little bit like black boxes, and that you trust how it's going to become. But in order to become truly proficient with a framework, you actually needed to understand its inner workings. And I think that because the amount of code and amount of speed that the younger programmers or DevOps or in general tech people are getting, the amount of understanding needed to actually know what has been generated in a single task becomes exponentially higher.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think we're seeing that even internally too a little bit, and working with clients as well. Are you noticing that anything from like an infrastructure systems point of view? Are you noticing that any services are starting to break in this like AI first world or AI first development? Like, is anything stressing?
There was few Cloudflare outages, and I believe, I'm not 100% sure here, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that they actually admitted using AI-generated code. So, yeah, of course. But then again, I do think that this is the only logical development. Right. So if you take a look at the history, right, we started with the punch cards, then we moved into assembly, then we moved into C. So the level of abstraction is rising, right? And the languages that we use for the programming, they become more flexible. So the LLMs are, of course, a little bit different because we are using natural language that is, by its very nature, much more flexible than any programming language. But I would argue that the mechanism is the same. So, you can, of course, say that the quality is going to drop, but this is the argument I think that can be also seen, for example, in the older software, that we are dropping optimization for the speed, right? So because it's not exactly the same. But my point is that there are always trade-offs, and in the short term, we are dropping a little bit of the quality of the code generated. However, the gains of speed are probably outweighing it in the long term. And given how fast the development of the quality of the large language model, how fast they are improving, I think that answer to this question probably won't matter in a few years.
Yeah, it's a great point about like the evolution of, from punch cards to assembly to like where we are today. It's almost I almost think of like, this may be a bad metaphor, but I almost think of like the snake eating its own tail. It's kind of feels like it's almost like where we are as an industry, which is, it's wild to think about. Do you think companies, both big and small, and you kind of alluded to this slightly earlier, but do you think companies are underestimating generative AI and are potentially avoiding it? Or
I don't think they are underestimating it. I think they are overestimating it.
Ooh,
so
okay.
It's a tricky subject, right? Because we have huge investments into companies that are not generating the revenue. And there's some minuscule percentage of those companies actually generating profit. So we all have identified, and I think that this is the case, that the LLMs are actually a breakthrough, revolution, right? Because we are automating the thing that was always only available to humans. And I'm not sure whether the LLMs are the tool that are going to be responsible for this revolution fully, because they all, of course, they have their own limitations, and by comparison to some other tools, let's say, they're fairly simple, and we don't fully understand how they work and why they work when you simply scale them up. But I would say that this is kind of similar to, for example, the construction of the railways back in the 19th century. And a lot of the companies that were responsible for actually building the infrastructure for the railways, especially, I believe, in England, they went bankrupt, right? Because everyone, they were investing huge amounts of money, and it was unsustainable. However, the ultimate effect was that the railway infrastructure, it survived, and it was a real value. So, of course, I am by no means expert on this, but I do see some parallels to this huge investments that we had in the past, and now, because all the infrastructure that is going to be created for the AI, even if it's not going to be profitable for the ones doing the investment, it is going to stay. And the same thing, I believe, happened during the dot-com bubble, right? The internet infrastructure actually got laid out, and there was a crash. However, the underlying infrastructure survived the crash, and it allowed for the growth of the companies like Google, Amazon, and so on afterwards. Mm-hmm. So I would say that it is going to be a revolutionary tool. I think everyone has identified it as such. However, I do think there is, at least from the financial point of view, a bubble surrounding it.
Fascinating parallel between that and the British railroads. I'm not familiar with that segment of history, let alone American history of the railroads, other than Rockefeller and the like. Built generational wealth and were ruthless in their pursuit of the railroads. I think it was Rockefeller. I could be wrong with that one as well, but that's my.
I am not super familiar with the topic as well.
But that's super interesting. If you had one message to give to a CTO on DevOps, what might it be?
Okay. So there is one message probably that I would like to have for, egoistical reasons, and there is one that probably makes more sense. So the first one will be, don't ignore DevOps in general, because DevOps is kind of the embodiment of how to deal with technical debt, right? It is something that is not very visible. It doesn't always bring business value. So I would say that maybe not for the CTOs, but it's probably more of a problem for CEOs, that having good processes surrounding the automation, both for the infrastructure, for the security, and so on, is something that is worth investing into early, at least in a way. But on the other hand, it's not worth to do it too early, right? Because if you don't have a product, you don't have an idea, you don't have a programmer, it's fairly easy to get caught up in hiring DevOps, trying to automate things that not necessarily need automation before the scale actually warrants it. So yeah, two contradicting messages.
I love it. Bart, this is fantastic. Thank you for coming on and bringing your lens to both your experience, the future, and currently what you're seeing. Before we adjourn here, for anyone who might watch this on video, can we get a sneak peek of your sweatshirt? Is it the Grinch?
Of course it is a Grinch. I absolutely love the fugly Christmas sweaters. So I have made the decision that I will keep wearing them even if it's outside of Christmas season. So people
It's amazing.
will get confused.
I absolutely love it. That is the embodiment of a perfect DevOps engineer, to stereotype them.
Yeah, I mean, I do have some shirts as well. Also, the case is I wasn't given any merch yet, so
It's
not
on
that
its
I'm
way.
suggesting anything, but I am suggesting things.
That's right. Don't worry, it's on its way. Well, awesome, Bart. Thank you so much for your time today. It was awesome chatting with you, and this is great. Hope you have a wonderful day.
Cheers. Have a nice day as well. Bye-bye.